ヤギ様から盗み取った北斗神拳、北斗を味合わせてやるわ。
Hello everybody, welcome to a new video. So recently I got a comment in one of my videos from somebody asking if I could do a video like this one where we're going to be talking about how to maximize DPS as a Necro Hpala M for Mythic Plus. And I figured there has been quite some people that have been wondering the same thing. I've seen some people struggling to really pull some numbers in Mythic Plus as a Necro Hpala M. So I figured we might as well try and do something like this and review some of the things that are important in order to do a lot of damage. So first, I want to touch on a couple things that are going to be mainly outside of your control and are not really just going to be your own gameplay, but are always going to be playing an important role in how much damage or how big your overall at the end of the dungeon is going to be. The first thing I wanted to mention is, of course, whether the key is tyrannical or fortified is going to have a huge impact on your overall. Why is that? Well, our main source of damage is Consecration, and the quicker mobs die, the less we're going to be in combat with them, and the more time we're going to be spending in combat with the bosses. So if we are playing a tyrannical key, we're always going to be spending more time killing single target bosses, where our overall damage is going to be lower than doing some big AoE packs, where over time we'll always do some more damage due to Consecration. Therefore, you should always expect to do a little bit less damage when you are doing tyrannical keys. Another thing that's going to be very important, and it's going to go following the same sort of thing, it's going to be the key level. The higher the key level, the longer the mobs are going to take to die, and therefore the more time you're going to be spending killing some big packs. And again, your main source of damage is going to be Consecration, AoE damage, and therefore the more you're killing mobs, the more AoE damage you're going to be doing, the higher overall you're going to have at the end of the key. However, of course, the higher the key level, it's also going to mean the more time you're going to be spending doing other sorts of mobs or bosses that are just going to be taking longer. So it's going to counteract itself a little bit, but overall, your main source of damage will always come from big pools where you're going to be spending quite some time, maybe a minute, maybe even a minute and a half, and you're going to be doing a lot of damage with Consecration down. Something else that's going to be important as well is going to be your comp. Of course, some comps you will have, for example, the 5% increased magic damage buff from playing with Demon Hunter, or you might have a mage, so you have intellect buff, or you might also have one sort of bloodlust or another sort of bloodlust, depending on what you're playing with, or even the shout buff from physical damage increase from playing with a warrior. All these things, as well as monk debuff, but all these things are going to have to be taken into account. Of course, it will buff the damage from the entire group, but if you are just looking at your own overall at the end of the key, keep in mind why that is the case. There's always going to be a lot of reasons that are not just going to be damn, I'm really bad, or I just don't know what I'm pressing, or what am I doing wrong. There's going to be a lot of other factors that will have a very important impact and should always be taken into account. Something else that I want to mention here is, of course, how clean is the key going to be? If you timed the key, but the key was a slugfest, and you died a lot, or the packs were very spread out, they took forever to kill, things were not done properly, it's just going to mean that you're going to be spending more time in combat, and therefore your overall will be lower. If you die a lot and the key is barely timed, again, you're just like doing packs that are not clean, you're just going in, doing bad damage, you dying, and you're coming back, and then you might kill it, but yeah, you've already spent time in combat. That's been not very good for your overall, so that also plays a big part. This also plays into how good your group is. If your group is very good and that everybody is doing a lot of damage, the packs will just die sooner. Another thing is that a lot of people are rerolling to Flavor of the Month, and therefore usually doing AoE damage is easier than doing single target damage. So you might have the case where you are playing with some pugs and they are doing okay in the pugs and in the AoE packs, I mean, they're destroying them, but once it gets to the single target damage, they're actually not able to do that much there because they're not that skilled in the class, they're rerolled, and usually you focus on the AoE aspect of things because not only is where the bulk of the damage is coming, but as well as like it's the fun part of it. So most people really want to invest time practicing those things. And then what really takes time and effort and what really makes you a good player of your spec is really being able to do also very meaningful amount of damage when it comes to single target and specifically bosses. So You might have a case where your group is okay in AoE scenarios, but when it gets to the bosses, it really falls behind, so your damage is of course going to be falling behind as well, just because you're spending a lot of time killing those bosses. So I think we're done here with talking about things that are not exactly your gameplay. Now, let's move ahead and talking about our own spec. One thing that's going to be very important, and it's going to be on our control, is going to be, of course, our gear, our stats, and our trinkets. If we have more gear, we're always going to be doing more damage. More intellect, more versatility, more haste, more crit. The less mastery, of course, the better. Now, if we have a bad stat weight or a bad set of stats, it's going to affect our damage. If we have less intellect, we're going to be doing less damage. What if we don't have, for example, the trinket from the sun or sausage from the raid? Well, that trinket is a lot of damage, and it can, in some scenarios, increase your overall throughput or overall damage at the end of the dungeon by like 1k or even more than 1k overall. So just that on its own, outside of your gameplay, is already going to be a massive difference. But of course, you can do something about it. You can farm it, you can get lucky, or you can buy a carry, whatever, but you actually have some sort of influence over there. Now, as I mentioned before, Consecration is our main source of damage, and one thing that a lot of Holy Paladins fail to do consistently is to keep Consecration always up. Now, I know Consecration is not a very impactful spell. You drop it on the ground, it stays there, the visual is not too clear, and you don't feel the impact of it, but it is going to be doing the most amount of damage, and the reason for that is because it is uncapped AoE. Now, if you drop it on a big pool, you might move the mobs outside of where you dropped Consecration initially, but you cannot forget to keep reapplying. You need to keep repositioning Consecration. And I see a lot of people not even thinking about it too much, because of course, it's not part of your healing. You do not use it to generate holy power, and it's not a direct spell, so it is not like a Crusader Strike or even a Judgment where you throw it and you feel the impact and it's like a meaningful spell. Consecration is very underwhelming, but you need to keep it on the ground. It's very, very important. It goes a long way if you have some sort of weak aura. For example, I have a weak aura that I can share with you in the description if you want, where it will tell you not only the cooldown of Consecration, but also it will shine when Consecration is not in the ground, because the duration of Consecration is longer than its cooldown. Sometimes you might see it off cooldown, but you know that since the duration is longer, well, I'm just not gonna press it right now. And I found myself over time really having less uptime of Consecration than I should, and it really goes a long way if you have some sort of indicator, in this case a weak aura, to just really tell you Consecration is not down. You have to press that as soon as possible. Now, that's not to say that Consecration is the first button that you should press at all times. It's not the most, it doesn't have the biggest priority. However, when it comes to purely damage in AoE scenarios, which are the scenarios where most of our overall damage is going to come from, it is the main source of damage, and therefore should be always kept in mind first. Another thing that's very important as well, and that's been a big subject of debate in many people, is being Shield of the Righteous usage. Shield of the Righteous is the offensive way of spending our holy power, and it will do a lot of damage. It actually amounts to very much a lot of damage over the whole dungeon. The thing is, since it's going to be meddling with our holy power usage, and it's going to really be a big struggle for somebody that's not that comfortable with the spec, really deciding whether to keep the holy power simply for a healing or defensive sort of usage, or should be more aggressive with it. Well, a lot of it is going to come down to how comfortable you are with the spec. The more comfortable you are, the more safe you're gonna feel, and therefore you're gonna be able to then decide when you really need to use the holy power for healing, or you are fine and safe to go ahead and use those Shield of the Righteous offensively. The rule of thumb is when you see 3 or more mobs stacked up immediately that you can hit, that's when you want to be using Shield of the Righteous. But of course, it's not going to be that simple. The more mobs, the better, but sometimes you have, for example, Forset. What do you do about the Forset? Well, should you be using Light of Dawn instead for some maybe cooldown reduction onto wings? Well, we're gonna be touching on that right just now. Using the 4 set is not straightforward at all whatsoever. It's going to come down a lot mainly to what your comp is. The more melee you have, the easier it's going to be to get some good value out of your 4 set. It's going to be just easier to spam out some Light of Dawns and therefore just do some healing, as well as of course proc some CDR. Now you cannot just be using Light of Dawn all the time, because in that case the amount of damage you'd be losing from not using Shields of the Righteous would then offset the amount of damage that you're getting from extra wings. And at the end of the day, the 4 set is an RNG element to our spec. We cannot really predict how much cooldown reduction we're going to be getting. Of course, it's going to average at the end of the day, because it's just a percent, like any other percent. Over time it will average. But when we can take the damage, when we can reliably do some damage with Shield of the Righteous in very, very good scenarios like a lot of mobs, we go and take that. Now, in not so clear scenarios where there's 3, maybe 2 mobs and we don't have wings up, and maybe we do have wings but maybe they're not ready yet, there's many ways of putting it, but it's going to have to be a thing that you just get used to. You gotta have to make your own rules, really, because the scenarios are so different. They can be so colorful, we could call them, that you're not really going to be able to determine, okay, in this scenario in particular, the way of playing this is this way. There's just no such a thing with healing. You might, for example, be in a scenario where using a Light of Dawn has some healing value to it. Maybe you are able to get a proc of wings and you do not have wings. Maybe you are going to benefit from the CDR, or maybe you get 0 CDR seconds and therefore it's useless. Maybe you had a charge of Vanquisher's Hammer, which we'll talk about in a moment. So maybe you can get a Light of Dawn through using a Word of Glory as well. There's just so many scenarios that really, it's gonna have to be a thing of how you feel it. Now, as I said before, the more melee you have in your comp, the better. And therefore, you're gonna be much more reliably be able to get use of the 4 set, because there's just gonna be more melee usually in front of you to hit with Lights of Dawn. But if that is not a reliable thing you can do, if you have too many range, if things are too spread out, if your value of Light of Dawn in that case is going to be almost 0, you should judge for yourself. The only rule that I can give you is Shield of a Righteous should be usually used when there's 3 or more mobs. Now, Vanquisher's Hammer, as I mentioned, I can see some people really kind of struggling to know what to do with this, because it's a short CD and there's 2 charges, so it's a cooldown, but it's almost like a core rotational spell. So it should be thought in both ways, actually. In some scenarios, you need to think about Vanquisher's Hammer as your main source of healing. If you have Vanquisher's Hammer, you are safe because it's gonna be a catch-up option, and Vanquisher's Hammer is just as strong, if not stronger, than a Divine Toll, because not only it does a lot of damage, but if you manage to hit everybody and you have a 2-set proc, a Vanquisher's Hammer, and then you consume the charge, it's going to top up everybody almost. So Vanquisher's Hammer should be almost thought as just as strong as Divine Toll. Now, in other scenarios where the healing is not going to be playing that much of a part, or it's almost just an afterthought, then your Vanquisher's Hammer becomes much more of a loose spell you can use at your own will, but still you gotta think about it as damage, mainly because of its damage, really. You need to always try and use it with wings, like that's really what I'm trying to get at. The damage from Vanquisher's Hammer will be very meaningful, but just like with everything else, the more wings you have, the more damage. But in this case, since it's such a heavy hitter, if you manage to, the more amount of Vanquisher's Hammer you manage to put out while you have wings, it's just going to increase its value by a lot more. And it's something that you can control a little more, because of course you're going to be throwing Judgment every, how long is it, 8 seconds. So you can't really try and line up every Judgment with wings. However, you can try and line up as many Vanquisher's Hammers with wings as possible. So it's got to be thought of it in both ways, something you're going to be throwing here and there without too much thought into it, purely for the sake of damage, as well as plan ahead, because it's going to be a healing CD that's going to be basically really the only thing that's keeping you from dying in many scenarios. As a Necro Hpala M, that is our main tool to top up our group in mainly bosses, tyrannical bosses, AoE healing scenarios, you name it. it is our comeback spell. And finally, of course, something that's almost obvious is going to be how comfortable you are with the spec, how clean your rotation is, how much holy power you generate, what's your positioning like, what spells you're using it, what's your spell prio. All of those things are kind of hard to put into a guide. It's something that you are going to have to learn over time by watching people play or simply experiencing the spec on your own, and over time getting comfortable with it, getting more clean into the flow of the spec, and you'll just naturally learn what works and what doesn't, and over time you'll just learn, adapt, and eventually overcome. So I think this is all I have to say. If you got any more questions, please drop them in the comments. If you want to watch me play live, please go to twitch.com/midwayeu, and then you can watch me play some keys live and also stream my raids. And I've got some gameplay in this channel, so you can check out those keys if you want to have some sort of guideline onto some gameplay to check out if you just want to see how I play. Otherwise, catch me live on stream and I'll answer any questions you might have. But that's gonna be all I have for this video, guys. So I hope you enjoyed it, hope you find it useful as always, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.